to another episode of the AppSec Insiders Podcast. My name is Farshad Abbasi. I'm the founder and chief security officer at Forward Security. This week, I'm joined with my co-host, Iman Sharfeldin.
My name is Iman. I'm an application security lead at Forward Security.
Thanks, Iman. For those of you who are new to AppSec Insiders, this is a show where we discuss the latest trends, best practices, and current events in the world of application and cloud security. If you're an AppSec professional looking for an opportunity to work with some of the best in the industry, or a developer with an interest in cybersecurity, be sure to check out our careers page at forwardsecurity.com/careers. We would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to the show, and be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter at Forward Security. Links are below in the show notes. But today, what are we going to talk about? Today, we're going to talk about AWS security reference architecture. So let's get right into it. Iman, would you like to tell us a bit about what SRA is?
Yeah, actually, we have a lot of customers that they ask us how we can make our AWS environment secure. And because of different reasons, for example, there are a bunch of compliance frameworks that they need to be compliant with. And, always our go-to reference is AWS SRA for AWS environment. And, in order to use AWS SRA, you need to use the multi-account strategy, which is crucial to have a solid security architecture. And also, like, SRA is based on a defense in depth method. And other than that, like, the good thing about SRA is that they provide some code examples, and you can use them as like infrastructure as code, and then you can deploy that in your environment. But before using SRA, you should know your estate, what kind of services, like security related services you have enabled. And, you should have like multiple accounts, one for, first of all, you should have enabled the organization. You should have an org account, org management account. You should have an OU for security, which contains like two accounts, which is security account and logging account. You should have OU for workload, and you should have an OU for infrastructure. And, in general, after that, you can use this SRA, and there are a bunch of services that we can go through them. Before that, Fashidan, do you have any?
I have a question for you. So, I'm curious because Amazon had the well-architected framework. So what is the advantage of the, like the security reference architecture? Is there a relationship? I guess my understanding is that the well-architected framework provided different sort of patterns, if you will, that would provide someone with a reference in terms of how they can secure their architect, not just security, actually. The well-architected framework had areas with respect to performance and security. I think if I remember correctly, there were information about how to structure your, application workflows, log archives, and all kinds of other things. But I'm wondering why Amazon introduced SRA when they already had the well-architected framework, and if there's a relationship between them. Do you know?
Yeah, actually, the SRA, there are three AWS security foundations: AWS Cloud Adoption Framework, AWS Well Architect, and AWS Shared Responsibility Model. And AWS SRA, actually, it aligns with all three of them, and kind of it's a complement to the all, it's aligned with all of them. Like, it's not something like irrelevant to them, but in general, it provides like more security capabilities for you.
Is it that SRA is taking those existing frameworks and grouping the security aspects of it? Like, for example, well architected had some security and non-security components, and then the other ones that you mentioned. So SRA is kind of taking the security pieces out of the other ones and grouping it together under one umbrella from a security perspective, I think.
Exactly. Well-architected framework, it has a security pillar, and which has like 7 design principles.
Mm-hmm. And what are do you remember what they are?
I believe one is like implement a strong identifying foundation, enable traceability, apply security at all layers, automate security best practices, protect data in transit and at rest, keep people away from data, and prepare for security events. And I believe these are the 7 things that they're reflected in AWS SRA. And SRA contains more details. Like
Right.
it talks about like there we have more abstract ideas.
Right.
SRA is more crisp, actually.
Right. And SRA focuses on security. Yeah, because I remember from when well-architected framework came out, the idea was that it provided a domain-specific lens for the different domains, security being one of the pillars, as you mentioned. And just for the audience to note, the well-architected framework also has hands-on labs, and there's the well-architected tool as well. And you can use the well-architected tool. It's at no cost. It's available in the management console. It gives you a mechanism for regularly evaluating your workload and identifying, areas of improvement. But as Aman, you were saying, it's not necessarily, the security part of it is really high level. I know a couple of our clients, not to be named, had done that test, and then they came to us and they said, hey, we ran the well-architected tool and they did a security review. Can you guys take a look at it? And we looked at it, and there weren't a lot of meaningful security issues. They were very high level, as Iman mentioned, super high level, not really. Of course, there's always value in finding security issues, but it would give you a bit of a false sense of security if that's the only thing you did and you relied on it. And in this case, that was where the client was going with it. They said, hey, look, we did the well-architected tool. Things are looking great. It's like, well, actually, no, because you didn't do a deep enough dive, right? So it's a great place to start. Absolutely well-architected tool, great place to start, but it's not going to go into a lot of detail. And I think that was one of the motivations for them to come up with the security reference architecture, to actually dig more into the security aspect of it, where well-architected review kind of left off, if you will. So yeah, what else let's maybe dig into the SRA a little bit. Iman, you mentioned something about the multi-account. I'm intrigued by that, and I want to talk about that a little bit. So the history of the whole multi-account is I think it was around 2016 or 2017 where Amazon introduced organizations and the concept of having multiple accounts under one roof. Companies could have always created multiple accounts, but before organizations, there was no way for a company to say, hey, I'm company X, and show me all of my accounts that belong to that company, right? They would have to just have a listing of all the account numbers and go figure it out. It wasn't tied together. So Amazon introduced the concept of organizations to allow companies to better manage these multiple AWS accounts that they have. Because before that, you would have to use tags, and then using tags, then you could, you could figure out which one of these belong to you, and kind of create a bit of a relationship with them. And billing and cost management was a nightmare, let me tell you. So when they came out with the organizations and the multi-account structure, it allowed companies to go to a master account from which all the child accounts come from, and they're linked. And in the master account, you could look at the billing, and across all the linked accounts. So it made billing a lot easier. But as a byproduct, which security often tends to be, is like someone tries to do some function to make the system work better, and then there's a security benefit, right? So in this case, the security byproduct, this multi-account structure, was that you should separate services that have something to do with security in their own account. So you should set up a multi-account architecture, and then the security relevant services, like for example, you might have an S3 bucket that stores your logs for CloudTrail, or there may be guard duty or some security service. You would stand those things up in that security account, and then that would belong to your organization in a multi-account fashion and be a child of one of your master account. But there are a lot of security benefits in the SRA. So Iman, maybe let's go into a few of them.
Yeah, I mean, there are many of them actually. The first one is like in general, having a multi-account system, it helps you to group workloads based on business purpose and ownership. It helps you to apply distinct security controls by environment. It helps you to constrain access to sensitive data, promote innovation and agility. For example, you can have sandbox account versus production account. It gives you more freedom there, and you can limit the scope of impact from adverse events. Also, it supports multiple IT operation models. Like it helps you to manage costs. It helps you to distribute AWS service quotas and API request rate limits, actually. And other than that, like I can tell you, like an AWS account provides security, access, and billing boundaries for AWS resources. And other than that, like having like multiple accounts and having an organization, you can define SCPs, which are service control policies. For example, you're using CA Central region. You don't want to have any resources on other regions. Suddenly, like one of your employees put the AWS secrets inside one of the GitHub repos, and now they're spinning up some EC2 instance to mine cryptos on Virginia. And if you define an SCP, then you can limit creation of any resources in any other region other than CA Central. And the other thing is that you can use AWS Control Tower when you have AWS organization. It helps you to govern multiple accounts easily by defining some guardrails, which could be both preventive and which could implement both preventive and detective controls. And there are a lot of benefits, and in a real environment, I believe we should always use AWS organization.
So it's interesting because as I'm looking at, as I'm thinking about SRA again, it reminds me of so this, before SRA, AWS had these patterns. So let's go back to what is SRA, right? SRA is essentially a set of reference architectures, right? So they're saying, hey, if you're building a system like this, then here's a reference architecture for you to set up your system in that manner. So they pretty much provide these blueprints or architecture diagrams of how you should where you should put everything and how they should be organized. So they actually had these. They had a bunch of patterns. They were called multi-account patterns. So in 2017, when they launched organizations, they had that. And then it's funny because I remember a couple of years ago, I kept looking for those patterns because I wanted to recommend them to some of our clients. I'm like, hey, where is the pattern for the shared service account? Where's the pattern for, multi-account and all that stuff? Guess what happened is they took them out of in their patterns, wherever it was repository, and they created this security. They just changed the name essentially, right? These things were there before, but they were just presented as like, hey, here's a bunch of patterns that you can use. But now they formalized it and they're calling it the reference architecture. So just to be clear, these are exactly what the name suggests, right? These are a handful of reference architectures that you could refer to so that you could build your environment in according to those ones. Like, for example, they'll have a reference architecture. If you look at, there's the shared services account, and it basically shows a diagram that says, hey, if you have a bunch of shared services, like for example, the directory service or AWS config or guard duty or things like that are shared across all of your AWS accounts, put them in a shared services account, right? What they also say is that don't overdo it. Like, don't go and create a whole bunch of AWS accounts and, like, for example, put the security stuff in one, put the IT in another. That's great if you're a really large company, but the Amazon says start small. So don't all of a sudden get really like account happy and then go, hey, they have this multi-account thing. I'm going to make lots of accounts and segregate everything. Give it some thought, right? Like, if you're a small company, definitely a single account should not be used, right? Like, what we see a lot is that most companies they'll create one AWS account and then they'll put like a VPC for their production, and then they'll set up a VPC for their staging, and then they'll set up one for dev, right? All in the same AWS account. You should not do that. Like, at a minimum, even if you're a small company, you should have one master account and then a child account, probably two. One child account would have your prod workload, and then a second one would have what I would call shared IT and security, right? And then you can at least have that separation. Probably a good idea to have another one as well for your staging. The reason being is that imagine if your staging and production are in the same AWS account, and then you give one of your developers access into that AWS account because they need to go and fix bugs and do things. Well, guess what? Because staging is in the same account as your production, now that developer might have too much access and be able to gain access to the the workloads that are in that same account that are doing production work, right? But if you put them in different AWS accounts, whatever access you provision to that person to go in that AWS account and work on the staging debugging would be nicely segregated from the production account, right? In fact, I had to do that the other day for our own company. One of our developers wanted to go and do some testing in AWS, and then he needed some access, and I was like, oh, I could go and create give you an admin permission, but then I realized that account has some sensitive stuff in it. So what I did is I just remembered Amazon's recommendation that you should always separate, AWS accounts are free, just make another one and then put all the testing stuff in there, which is what I did. So something to be cognizant of. And these patterns are there as a reference. Take a look, and then, doesn't have to be implemented exactly as is. You can modify them to suit your need, right? And just remember that what I was mentioning earlier, don't make it complicated. Don't overdo it. Don't create too many accounts. Start small and grow from there.
Yeah, as Farshad told, I believe, this is like a security framework. And when we have a framework, actually, we can skip some of the services that we don't need, actually. And the main, we can share the link with you guys, the link to AWS SRA.
We could put it in that's a good idea. We should put it
in the caption.
In the text.
Yeah, actually. And the first account that we should go we should talk about is org management account. And these account, there are a bunch of services that you need to enable for this account. And the first thing, like if you have any SCP, anything, you should enable it right now. And the other thing is that I've seen like customers, they have multiple accounts, but they don't have like a central place for authentication. They're not using AWS IAM Identity Center, which is kind of like the successor to AWS SSO. And they have like many accounts and they have many users. Like for example, user X is on this account and that account and this account. This is very hard to maintain. Like, do you have any idea when we should use?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any thoughts on that. I think, basically just what you said. I think it's always good to be considerate when it comes to those types of issues.
Yeah, awesome. And the other thing is that we have other services that we can enable, but such as IAM Access Advisor, we should enable that here in this org management.
How will that help them?
It helps to it provides traceability data in the form that which services the access information about like different OUs that we have. And it's a good tool to use. And other than that, like Control Tower, we have discussed about that, and you should enable that on this org management. And
let's just step back for a second. So what does Control Tower do, and how will it help them in this? So we're talking about the security reference architecture, right? So let's say I've implemented the multi-account structure, and I've got a master account, and I've got my production account, and I've got my shared services/security account. So at a minimum, I've got 3 accounts. So how would Control Tower help in this situation?
Control Tower has a broad and flexible set of features. It helps us to govern a secure multi-account AWS environment.
Right.
There's some stuff called there's something called a landing zone. Right. You start to create your landing zone.
That's right.
Which are like boundaries, and then
so let's tell the audience a bit more about landing zones.
Before using we have guardrails, and before talking about guardrails, landing zone, I should talk about guardrails.
Yes.
And those are some preventive and detective controls that we can use actually. And for example, those are AWS config rules that we talk for example, there shouldn't be any S3 buckets that are not encrypted, something like that. And but we can provide some links for the users to how to create the landing zone. But
generally the concept is that so to me the name is like a landing zone. So I think so my memory is before they had landing zones, when you had multiple accounts, it was really complicated to log into them. So if I had 6 accounts, I remember I did this in 2017. I made a page essentially that when the user authenticated, it went to this web page and it showed all the different accounts that were available to me. And then I could pick one and it would log me into that. That was like sort of a hacky version of what this is, right? I think now they've come up with this concept of a landing zone, which after authenticating, you land in this place. And then from there, it'll be like, hey, these are the accounts that are available to you. Which account do you want to select? I think that's been that's the service they made, is so they sort of matured it. Instead of everyone making their own landing page, this is the service that you would use to be able to successfully manage or log into multiple accounts from there, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. And the other service that we should enable on this org management account is AWS, or not we should use, or we could use, is AWS Artifact, especially like when you want to be compliant with I don't know, PCI, SOC 2, anything like that.
I'm interested in that. Tell me more. PCI.
The thing is that AWS security in AWS is a shared model, and you can download all the reports for the AWS side. Like if you want to prove that you're SOC 2 compliant, your company should be SOC 2 compliant. Also, AWS should be SOC 2 compliant. And in order to do that, you provide the report actually, and you should provide the report. And it's obvious. You should go there, and you can download all the PDF files there. You should just search, for example, SOC 2. You can search there, and that's it.
Very cool. So this then allows me to have compliance. It's interesting. So what would be the difference between this and so I know Security Hub runs under the hood something like CIS benchmark checks and all that type of stuff. Is this similar?
No, it's just the static PDF files. Those are like AWS like reports for compliance. Actually, there are a bunch of reports that you can download. Actually.
Oh, based on
these are for AWS, just to prove that AWS is.
Oh, this is like the AWS.
Yeah, exactly.
That stuff is available. Okay, and then so using the security reference architecture. So how do I take advantage of it using the?
As a part of like org management account, you can enable the access to AWS Artifact, and the user can go there and download all the reports. And
so this says that Amazon is PCI certified.
It's not exactly. No, it's not. But in order for you become PCI certified, the Amazon should be PCI certified too. Actually,
so I can get access to those Amazon reports through. Where do I get access to them?
AWS Artifact. Actually,
very cool. That's actually really good info, because I've often been asked about this. We have a lot of our clients build. They build applications on top of AWS, of course, right, which is a great platform. And then what happens is they get audited for SOC 2 or PCI. And then, of course, the auditor wants to know where you're hosting your stuff. Hey, we're hosting it at hosting provider X, in this case, Amazon. The auditor will ask, hey, can you give their SOC 2 attestation or PCI or whatever? So this is one way to be able to get that information. That's really useful. I think we're coming up to the end of the time for this episode. It's been a fantastic conversation. AWS is one of my favorite topics, actually. In fact, Iman and I just did a 5-part mini-series for Amazon in partnership with them. And this is the second time we've repeated that mini-series. I'm sure we're going to do it again in the future. If you're interested in learning more about AWS, you should keep an eye on it when we repeat it again, probably in the fall or winter of this year. We'll probably do it again. So check our forwardsecurity.com website. And I believe it'll be under resources. We have a section where we post information about upcoming events. So keep an eye out there. And if we run it again, I highly recommend that you come check it out. Each part of the 5-part series focuses on a different area of security. For example, we cover identity and access management, we cover network security, we cover cryptography, we cover compliance services, logging and monitoring. So all of those are very beneficial, and we dig into each of those the services in each of those domains and give you some useful advice. Okay. So with that said, let's wrap it up.
Awesome. And we have an event, Collision. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh yes, Collision. It's North America's largest technology event. So Forward Security will be present at Collision next week. So from June 26 to 29, we actually have a booth. So if you are going to be at Collision, come by our booth on Thursday, June 29, and take a look at our Eureka product and say hello. We'd love to meet you. And we're hosting a happy hour as well. Drop us a line and we'll provide you with all the information.
Awesome. Do we have any prizes?
There is a prize if you come by and get a demo. You can also get a demo remotely if you like of our Eureka product. Getting a demo makes you eligible to enter for the prize draw, which is going to be a fantastic MacBook Air, a brand new MacBook Air. So if you want to win one of those, get a Eureka demo today and you'll be eligible.
Awesome. That concludes this episode of our AppSec Insiders Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed learning about AWS SRA. I believe one session is not enough to cover all the topics on SRA. We can have more sessions about that. Remember to tune in next time as we delve deeper into the world of application and cloud security and explore new ways to protect our digital assets. Also, we appreciate your support and engagement. If you have any topics in your mind, please send a topic to appsecinsiders@forwardsecurity.com, or our Twitter handle is @FWD_SEC, or feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, Forward Security. And that's it. If you please follow us, and please also subscribe to our podcast. Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Take care, everybody.